In-house is the direction where digital marketing is traveling, and it has been for some time now. You only need to take a look at the Bannerfly report on in-housing in Europe to see that over 73% of brands have an in-house team, and 78% of the Association of National Advertisers in the US reports that some degree of in-house capabilities exist already. Indeed, the shift from agency to in-house has far surpassed the trend phase and moved well into becoming the new normal for digital marketing. But building an in-house marketing team doesn't happen overnight. It takes an immense amount of time, money, effort, and resources to plan and perfect, let alone put into action. Common challenges associated with building an in-house team include things like high cost, gaps in expertise and capabilities, creativity, talent acquisition, expert data management, and difficulties in keeping up with industry trends. Is there a way to better increase the creative potential of in-house teams while avoiding the challenges? I guess our guest, I believe, has some answers. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by SproutWorth.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest today is Kasper Sierslev. Kasper, you're the Chief Commercial and Creative Officer at Zeit. I believe it's a company that helps brands establish and fortify in-house competencies. You're something of a visionary thought leader dedicated to transforming in-house marketing and creative collaboration. In fact, you bring a wealth of experience, which includes pivotal roles and respected brand agencies, as well as steering your own startups and overseeing global campaigns for one of the world's largest shipping companies. Uh, it's quite the resume, Casper. I'm curious, given your journey to date, was there a specific incident or event that got you thinking about how to bring or elevate expertise in-house, as opposed to what a lot of people talk about, which is outsourcing various elements of their marketing and other operations as well?
Yeah, there was. And hey, hi, Vinny. Good morning. Yeah, I think there was. I think there were actually two incidents. So the first one was
What?
when I was hired in at Maersk, the world's biggest shipping company, and I was in my onboarding phase traveling the various markets. So I was in India, and I was in Manila, and I was in Egypt, and I realized that we were doing the same thing with different agencies.
Mhm.
So when I came home, I suggested that some of the things that we were doing, we should take home. So that was a very basic element of it. And then I also realized that we were spending a lot of time briefing agencies, external agencies, on a lot of the basic stuff. So instead of having to do all the I normally put in-house agencies into different levels. So the first one is the production level, the
Mhm.
studio stuff. And then, of course, you raise the bar. You want to be more of a media agency. You want to be more creative with content and so on. So that was the first one. That was when I realized that we were doing a lot of the same stuff, the same campaigns across markets because we didn't coordinate, and we could do that more efficiently because we had the brand knowledge already. And then obviously it was about having the right resources available. The second time was actually in the next job when I realized that everything was the same. So I moved from global shipping to online trading. And on on the on the first apparent level, everything was different because there's nothing to do with each other. But all
Mhm.
the production stuff, everything from except the creative idea and the brand's experience is the same. There's no difference in how you produce content or produce banners or print materials. So that was the time that I realized that you could put all of this into ways of working, methods, and so on. And that's what I've basically been doing ever since. So trying to take all the dull stuff out of it and make it even more boring. So it's like a standard. So
The idea of a Zeit hasn't changed since you first began the agency.
A bit, because we have this idea that we want to be like, we have the three ground principles. So we want to be anti-fragile. So
Mhm.
whenever something changes, and it does all the time in this world, now we have AI coming in, but the companies we work with change. So we want to be able to to scale and be flexible for that. So we have this principle that we want to be able to change fast. And the second one is simplicity. So we don't want to make things too complicated or have too many. I've been in big global companies with procedures for everything. You have to do this and that and fill in this form. And that takes out a lot of the agility in how we can work. So some of the things have changed. We also realized that in-housing has some downsides. The people you bring in, I don't hope, I hope no of my employees here that know, but you do get a bit of complacent, and when you go to work the same place every day and you're not challenged by new ideas and so on. So we also try to work that part in. I also did that before, bringing in people to inspire us and so on. So some of the ideas have changed, but I think in general, what we're doing is the same as when we started out.
Okay, right. And given your journey to date, I'm curious, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
I think it's bringing creativity in-house. So again, when you start on that, we also did a report similar to Bannerflow's report that you mentioned in the intro. We do that every year. And one of the thing is you have that basic level. It's not even necessarily something you consider calling an in-house. You just have the resources. Everybody has a social media manager. Everybody has graphic designers inside, but it's not organized as an in-house agency. So that's the very first level. That's putting it into a name, saying this is an in-house agency. It's probably more like a production studio or something like that. And for me, it's like getting to that level. I don't know what it's called, 3 or 4, where you actually take in ownership of the creativity. So you have a more long journey in creativity in-house. Of course, you still should bring in experts to challenge you and have that outside in perspective. But for me, I would love to see more agencies get to that third level.
Okay. Which is interesting because there's perhaps a perception that in-house agencies lack creativity and therefore that creativity needs to be outsourced. Obviously, there's a bit of a mind shift that needs to occur from what I'm hearing. I'm curious, how do you help them navigate that journey?
First of all, I think if you only work with new brands every day and you challenge yourself like the external agencies does, you have to be better. So external agencies, I think they will always be better because that's their core competences to be more creative. But that is in that niche area of just coming up with ideas. The in-house agencies has the benefit of knowing the systems, knowing the brands, the platforms that they are out on. So they can think creativity in all steps of the user journey, so to speak. But what we do, my main job is actually to talk creativity at our sites, as we call them. So that's traveling around, showing them great examples from outdoors, from the outside world, from Cannes Awards or big international advertising awards, and challenge them. It's also talking about how we can actually drive creativity, show that by creating more fun, creative things, we can actually have a bigger impact. One of our biggest clients, where our biggest agency is at Grundfos, which is world's biggest pump company. So they produce pumps for water heaters and so on. So it's very B2B. But still, we can see that every time we do something that's out of the category, it just works better. So that's basically what I'm trying to drive all the time. I always say you can't bore people to buy your products. You need to do something entertaining, have them look at what you're doing.
Certainly, could you give us an example, like with the pump company? What are the sorts of elements that inspired creativity?
Yeah. So if I have a recent example, so one of the products they are doing, is a small white box. So basically pumps, you hide them. It's not something you want to see. So this is actually moving into the B2C area, but still or it's B2B2C. So it's selling into installers
Right.
and so on. But one of the products that they had limited success with is something that you put behind your toilet. So it's a small,
Mhm.
yeah, or a kitchen. So in at least in the main cities and in Europe, it's difficult to move the basic infrastructure in your house or in your apartment
Yeah.
around. But with this small pump, which looks very dull, it's just a white box. You can basically place your kitchen in a new area. You can use that attic or the basement for a guest bathroom or a new kitchen or something like that. And they were very much into doing what they've always done. So just showing this and say, this is the new Solo Lift 2 product. Now you can, with a Merculator, and you can place. And what we were trying to tell them is, why not go out there and place a kitchen somewhere where you didn't expect it, or have that image of the old attic in a house where you just draw in as your imagined kitchen, the kitchen that you have in your mind. So I'm not sure I'm explaining it really well, but the idea is to have people think about how you could do this. So that's the example here of trying to say, you don't need to show the product. The product
Mhm.
itself is not interesting. It's what the product can do. And that's where we try to take that creativity from outside to put it in the B2B world. A couple of years back, we also did something we called the World Championship for Installers, to try to bring them in from around the world and have them compete against each other. How could you do the nicest installment of pumps
Right.
or water areas and so on? So try to do something out of the ordinary and not just show how-to videos or basic numbers.
Mhm. Brilliant. Now, creativity is great, and a lot of people and traditional marketers would certainly focus very much on the ideas and the creativity that's required in the job. But I would say over the past few years, there's been an increased focus on making data-driven decisions, and certainly that's been required given the perspective of boards and leadership within the organization as well. Is there also the need to have a more of a balanced conversation between this idea of creativity as well as being data driven?
Yeah, I would say so. I think actually we in the last, I don't know, one or 2 years seen
Mhm.
a shift going back towards creativity. So ever since I would say 2006, 7, where basically you got Facebook and you got all the numbers. So creativity always had that lack of showing evidence of what's
Mhm.
working. And then you have certainly coming in banner tools and online media buying, Facebook, or Meta, where you could show results. And that kind of shifted everything towards short termism. I think
Mhm.
it's not something I think there's plenty of
Yep.
plenty of proof of this. But, and of course, if you have something where you can show what you're actually doing, you're building a brand, you're doing something that's for the longer term, and you have on the other side numbers. In any reasonable business, you would pick the numbers. You would
Mhm.
show this is what's working. The thing is that I've seen in the last 10 years, we just seen a decline on actually creativity and brand building activities. And it also seems that it's not working that well to just do that retargeting thing. Of course, you need to have it, but the shift should be more 50-50, or I saw a number saying actually it was more like 40-60 towards brand building, but it's just really difficult to measure. So I think we're shifting back towards the gut feeling and
Mhm.
showing the numbers in the long term. That said, we focus a lot on data and showing what we're doing. So we have this learning loop incorporated on short termism, where we have a hypothesis that something will work.
Mhm.
And we can, in general, see that when we do something more creative, not weird or out there, just a bit more creative, just a better headline or the more intriguing image, we can see it's working better. So in this learning loop, we start out with a idea we want to test, say, I think this is better. And then we monitor it closely based on, of course, the existing data we have on the platforms and so on,
Mhm.
and see if it's working. We actually did this all the way back on not on everything, but on specific campaigns when I was at Maersk. So we had the idea that things would work. And if they didn't in the first 30 minutes, we would have to change the headline, change the image and so on.
Right.
And I think we put that more into a system now where we are testing things, but it's a very short loop. So we know if it's not picking up within the first 5, 10, 30
Mhm.
minutes, it's not going to do it. And then we have to change it or take it down. So I'm a big fan of data. I actually started out at Millward Brown. I think they changed the name now, but 25 years ago or something like that, 28 years, testing commercials and advertising and interviewing people just because I wanted to know what kind of worked
Mhm.
in Denmark, at least. So I like the data. I like to look at what's working and so on. But I think you have to have that also. It's very difficult to measure something that you haven't done before. And creativity is by default doing something new, right? So it is difficult to have all that data proving what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I think what we're seeing in the Nordics, at least, is that building long-term brand value by adding creativity into things actually proves over time that it's working. You can't keep doing those short-term
Sure.
buys anymore. At least not
Certainly.
just that.
Yeah. I can certainly understand how you would be able to extrapolate data fairly quickly from ad campaigns and things of that nature, which you can test out in the short term. But for something like, and I'll just use an example that you shared before, the World Championships for plumbing installers or home renovation experts, I would imagine that would be a longer term campaign that you would need to run. How would you suggest that people with these creative ideas that may require more resources and perhaps longer timeframes to test could assess the viability of these ideas in order to give it the best chance of success as opposed to others?
Yeah, I mean, that one took a long time of planning. It
Mhm.
was like a big thing, but that's the advantages of where we are technology wise
Yeah.
at the moment. So it's really easy to set up and measure, is something that you're doing working. So of course you can have a lot of these quick fixes, testing engagement and what in terms of, I think it's for create. I have another example actually I want to share with you, but it's also allowing yourself to be creative in smaller steps. So it's not necessarily the big campaigns. It's also
Mhm.
in the, let's just say in the display banners or in the small advertisements that you actually try to stand out and not try to bore people with what you're doing and all the numbers and so on. But it's also allowing your, if you have an in-house creative team or if you're bringing someone in, to actually look at the bigger picture, look at the website data. Where are people joining in? I have this example from when I was at George Jensen, which is a big jewelry and home decoration company that goes like 100 years ago or back. Sorry. So we were redesigning the e-commerce web shop, and the guys from the e-commerce team, they came down and said, yeah, people are not buying because it's got all too Nordic and boring with all the colors. It's really dull. You need to put in some more color on the buy button because nobody is clicking on it. It's people are not buying. I said, okay, that seems strange, but let's just take a look. And we looked at this heat map hotjar of what people were doing. And we could actually see that wasn't the case. People were clicking on the front page, especially the men. They were going in on the big page, the front page. They were finding the ring they wanted for their loved ones. They were clicking on it, getting to the product page, and then they click buy very intuitively. And then they click buy again, and then they click buy again. And then they realize the small drop down on top of it, where you have to pick the ring size. And then you get these, I don't know, 14, 16 different ring sizes. And then everything moved into slow motion. Nothing really happened. The mouse didn't move. And then they left the page. And that was especially the men in 25, 20 to 30, 40 something area. And we sit back and say, okay, it's not the color of the buy button. It's something very different. There's a very human problem behind this. It's not technology. It's actually people don't know the size of the ring for their loved one, maybe even for themselves. So what we did was going back and say, how can we solve this? And we looked at different options. And the easiest, not the easiest one, but the best one was actually designing a small web page where you could borrow a ring from your loved one and just put it on your screen, and you could see the size and you could put it back. And it was very easy developed. I think we spent, I don't know, I think it was like, what are we talking, dollars or euros or something? It's not a lot. I think the biggest part of the budget was actually going out and measuring all the screens with a ruler to see if the size was correct on all the different phones out there. And the best part was that it didn't even need marketing. We just put it up there. Of course, some photos on our social challenge, but it wasn't paid. It was just organically, and it just started spreading. Not being very woke, I would say that a lot of women just tagged their husbands on loved ones and saying, here, John, I think this is for you, or something like that. And it spread that way. And I think that's because we were an internal creative team, that we were able to go outside of the box, just doing a redesign of the website or doing an advertising commercial, that we were actually able to say, it's another problem. There's a human problem behind this business problem or this technology problem. And I think that doesn't take a big budget or a big team to do that kind of stuff. Actually looking at your website and say, everybody is doing this, but is it also right for us? Or is this actually the problem that we're trying to solve? Or are we just doing what everybody else?
Certainly. And are there specific strategies or methodologies that you would recommend to use as a framework to uncover the human problems behind the business problem?
It's really, we always look for insights, but not data insights. It's more like human insights. So if you look at stand-up comedians like Seinfeld, it's more observational stuff. So if you could say, do you know when and you look at those people, human things that we have in common, like when I say people who don't have a car, they always tend to slam the door a bit too hard or something like that. And we all know that kind of feeling. Or when you give your loved one flowers, you're allowed to stay out a bit later in the evenings or something like that. And that's something you can build your ideas from. So it's not very data driven. Of course, after that, we test our hypothesis. But in the beginning, it's very much, I say something. Have you ever noticed that something? And then people say, oh yeah, that's actually true. And then we start building on that. So it's very old fashioned, I think, but
Certainly. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're suggesting that we use more of an improv kind of attitude and perspective, improvisation being, I guess, the longer form of improv that comedians use, especially stand-up comedians use, to ensure that the jokes or the outcome that you're wanting actually lands, and that people take the kinds of action that you would expect them to. But I'm also hearing that we need to be students of psychology in a manner of speaking. Would that be correct?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's very much human behavior. I love my dashboard of all the agencies and how much stuff are we doing. But a lot of the time, you don't really know the thing behind the numbers. I remember I was also at George Jensen, we had this big dashboard of sales online and everything around the world. And every morning we came in and we looked at the numbers, and they were either good or bad. And we also we always ended up discussing why it was. So this is, and we said, this is a bit delayed. Maybe it was what we did 2 days ago, and then people are picking up. No, I think it was because I did this and that. So I think the more data we got, of course we had rich discussions, but in general, we didn't really know that much from the dashboard and all the data. And I love all the analysis that brings us to something new. But sometimes it's also looking at what are people doing, like with the ring size and thing, where you just realize that people have a certain behavior on your page and say, that's strange, or that's something we can build from. So yeah, I would say it's psychology or behavioral science, or I don't know what it's called now, but something like that. Yeah.
In neuroscience, yes. If that is the case, then I'm assuming that certainly empathy and the customer experience are certainly key elements that we should be looking to address. Are there particular metrics or activities that you encourage people to engage in order to broaden their worldview and better understand customers?
Yeah, I think some of it is also realizing that you're not the most important thing in their life.
Yeah.
Again, an example from George Jensen, we were trying to build these rich experiences with our customers, showing them inspiration for their home or how they could stack their rings or something like that. And then we realized that a big potential, no, a big percentage of our customers were men, again, that didn't really want to bother with us. So they just wanted something safe. So they wanted to go into the stores, the physical stores, and just get something that wouldn't get them into trouble. Something that really fast. If you think of the what's it called, Love Actually film from what is it, 20 years ago. So the Rowan Atkinson experience, where he's trying to buy, is it a ring or perfume or something, and he keeps putting in all this stuff, and he basically just wants to buy something that's quick. And we realized it was the same on the website, it was the same in the stores,
Right.
that a lot of customers, they just wanted to buy something. They didn't want to have an experience, storytelling and everything. Some of them would. So that's back to different personas, different offering different possibilities to go in and out of your shop. Basically, it's the same if it's digital or if it's physical. Sometimes you just want to buy something. You don't want to have that rich experience and the brand story and why you were doing this, the big purpose. Maybe it's just getting a new shirt. And I think, again, I think people are different, and some wants that big story. So it's again, it's back to the science part of it. So go out, look at your data, or look at your stay at a day behind the desk in a store and actually look at what people are doing. How are their browsing behavior, and notice if it's a couple going in and the man just sits down in the middle and pick up his phone and do something. Maybe there's a possibility to do something for him there, or I don't know. I have no idea. Just a game or something that could actually engage him in something. I was rambling. Sorry. I was just getting it out of, sorry, but
Yeah, so you're suggesting that we really get down to the customer level and put ourselves as close to them as possible in order to observe behaviors, and it is from those observations that really our empathy and understanding of customer experience really expands, which makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm curious though, for online scenario, be it a software as a service company or something like that nature. Would you suggest that we undertake things like surveys or get on calls with them? What would be the best way to?
So yeah, coming from the analytical part of it, I would love to observe more than do surveys.
Right.
And this is just my opinion. People tend to put themselves up on a high stage when you ask them, or what are you doing and what are you thinking? And a lot of this is basically our basic, what do you call it, reptile brain doing something. We don't really think about it. We afterwards, when we're asked, we overanalyze it, and we come back with some rational answer. But in reality, we're just doing something. I think this goes for online as well. But the problem is not as big online, because a lot of companies are doing this. They have the big dashboard setting, getting all this data back. The problem is that you're only testing what you're doing. You're not, it's very rare that you're setting up different kind of buying scenarios, because it's difficult to do.
Yeah.
Or if you want to do that, you have this big complex setup. Of course you can do it, And you can have like the Adobe Target thing where you can have different experience per persona. If you can identify them, if they spend this month amount of time on this page, they're probably more into this and that. And then, but it's just a very expensive way to do it. And sometimes the easier way is to observe people. Ask your friends to go through your website and just look at what they're doing, when they're stopping, what kind of roadblocks they are meeting, and their feedback. And then you can try. It's very much a test and learn approach where you say, okay, maybe it's better if we do this small adjustment, and then people, they won't leave the customer journey in the end. It's sometimes the very simple stuff that people can't figure out how to actually buy or put things into the basket, and then that's the problem you need to solve.
Right.
Other times it's getting new customers in. In general, there are different matrix you can look at. So you can bring in more potential customers. You could look at the conversion rate, or you could look at your rebuying circle at the end. How do you bring them back? If it's a pair of shoes, how often do you buy shoes? Or if it's rings or jewelry or something like that, then is it for an anniversary? Have they done this for the last 2 or 3 years on the same month? Then it's probably that time of year that they need to buy something. It's Christmas. And then you don't need to bother them the rest of the year, because I'm just saying something.
Yeah.
But in general, I think there are these three very simplified matrix. You could look at bring in more customers, look at the basic advertising, or you could look at the conversion rate and say, if you can change one of these numbers in the conversion rate, that's definitely better because you already brought them in. So that's something you can do yourself, or at the end where people are loyal to you, they have bought your product, they know you. Maybe it's that email flow and not being too pushy.
Certainly. And now you've released more recently the annual in-house barometer. I'm curious, what would you say are the key findings from your report or study?
So the first one was, I should have realized this before, but it was just new to us that it was really hard to identify in-house teams, because they come in all sizes and shapes. And I think 25% of the things that we identified as an in-house team didn't realize it themselves. So that was just inside the marketing department. They had a team of graphic designers and they have some copywriters and so on, but they didn't really look at themselves as an in-house team. And maybe, so we say they are, because it is a team, but they are not an in-house agency working in the agency ways of working, or with a project manager running things, and you have a very specific methodology of how to do it. They were more like getting things from all over. So that's the first one. The second one, which is funny when we show it, is all the difficulties with in-house agencies. It makes a lot of sense to bring things in, but staying out of the big corporate world as an in-house team, having time to do creative work, because you tend to get swamped with meetings and information that you don't really need at this time, is the biggest roadblock for a lot of in-house agencies. They get involved way too early. They are involved in too much stuff. I know some of this is contradictory to what I said before, but sometimes you need to isolate the team and say, instead of doing 1 or 2 posts at the time, take out a day and actually do something for a month, or produce something bigger. And the in-house teams, they tend to don't have enough time to be creative. They're always waiting for a brief for somebody else to tell them what to do. So that was one of the biggest insights. Then I think we are everybody's talking about AI. So I think we've been this is the third stage in-house and AI that I just experienced. So the first one was everybody was just, wow, this is amazing. And they were trying out things. Then in March, April, we hit the compliance, say, are we actually allowed to share this information? What happens? Nobody had big corporate accounts. Everybody was just setting up their own accounts, maybe with their company card, but maybe just doing it on their own. and the companies didn't have any overview of what people were doing and
Mm.
how they were sharing information. And so that was a big setback. And now we're at a stage where everybody is saying, oh, look how easy it is. And the thing is that it's very easy to get to 80%. It's very easy to type in a prompt and get a really nice image on Midjourney or Firefly or DALL-E or something like that. And it's also very easy to type in a prompt that gives you something back from ChatGPT. The difficulty is getting it home. And that's where I see where people are struggling now. So they get something that looks amazing, but it's just not exactly how they want it. So then they spend 20 seconds on getting to 80%, and then they spend 2 or 3 hours getting to the finish line because it's really difficult to do those last edits. And that's where I see people are struggling now. There's a lot of people talking about, oh, say how this is how easy and this is where everything is going. And then there are the people who actually works with it who says, yeah, but it's not that easy. I have to type in the same prompt a million times and actually go back into, if it's images or videos, go back into Photoshop and actually do what I did before with stock images, take the best part from this one and this one. But I think back to your question, what was the biggest insight? This is that everybody
Mhm.
is using AI now, but nobody really knows who's doing it and how they are doing it because they don't have that. It's not compliant anywhere at the moment. Some companies are, of course, getting there, but it's really difficult. Then I think the biggest trend. So we were interviewing 1,200 people in around Europe, working in some ways with in-house, was the creative part. That more and more companies, unfortunately, not in the Nordics where I'm sitting, but mostly in the UK and especially in France and Germany and Spain, more and more companies were bringing in creative directors. So they were taking on the creative lead.
Mhm.
So a few years back, it would be the marketing managers asking a creative agencies to come up with something, they would do something, and then you would take the idea back home and do all the content, cut it up and
Mhm.
use it in various places. Now it's more uh, the marketing manager asking the in-house creative director, how should we do this? They create the idea, they bring in sometimes external people to help with that idea, but it's smaller teams. It's not necessarily agencies. So they hire in a team for the ideation process.
Mhm.
And then they go out back to photographers, yeah, film crews, and so on, and actually put it together. So they are taking more ownership of the entire creative process. That was what we are seeing, I would say, tendencies at the
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, are you suggesting, therefore, that in some organizations, at the very least, that they've been built out through more of an ad hoc or organic needs basis, that they should really look at maybe restructuring a little bit so that they operate like an agency or a media publishing company within the larger company itself, and operate that way going forward?
Yeah, that's basically what we are doing when we run some of the agencies, but on the other
Mhm.
agencies, we're just consulting on how to do it. And we very much advise on building an agency in-house where you, what do you call it? You build a kind of a wall around the
Mhm.
creative people so they have time to do their job. You don't involve them in everything, but you also take ownership of the process. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't bring in external people.
Mhm.
It's just having the entire process in-house. I sometimes refer to when I was very young and I played bass at a jazz club. So I was very young. Don't tell my mom or whatever the joke is. But it was like improv night, and I was playing there with a drummer who was actually very skilled. I was more like filling in. But then we had various musicians coming in and jamming with us, and we were just
Mhm.
the backup group. And in jazz, it's very simple. There are, I would say, 40, 50 standards, so to speak, and that we knew because you could just practice them. And then somebody would come in and say, "Oh, can you do Autumn Leaves in A minor and And then we knew the standard, and they would jam across it. So on top of it, so to speak. And it's very much the same way that we look at what we're doing. So building up that standard, this is how you should do stuff. Of course, sometimes you deviate from that process. Who's doing what at one, who's doing what when. And I think that's what we recommend companies doing. Look at the roles and responsibilities, to build your workflows, your swim lanes, and say, okay, this is when I need somebody coming in, bringing in an idea. And I don't want the big presentation. Sometimes I just want them to come in. If it's a creative process, I just want them to come in with a pen and paper and draw ideas, because at this stage, we just want to judge the idea. We don't want to judge your abilities to do Photoshop or whatever. We just want to test the idea. And then at a later stage, you say, now we are in the core production. So that's what, so we recommend that people remapping their processes and say, who do we need when and how much do we need them? And then there's nothing rocket science to it. It's really just doing it, realizing, is this a freelancer or something we need to bring in here? Or do we actually utilize this role enough to bring them in on a permanent basis? Because this is core to our business, having that knowledge and so on.
So you're suggesting that we bring in external partners on a needs basis. Is there a conversation to be had around bringing in external partners so we can actually enhance the creative capabilities of the in-house team as well?
Yeah, I think so. For a lot of companies, especially B2B, it's really difficult to attract the rock stars. And if you do, then they sometimes lose their edge. I've been at consulting companies where you bring in the best, and then a year in, they lost that, because they are the people who used to be challenged all the time and sometimes sit at the agencies late at night and work on something. And when they sit in a company where everybody leaves at 5, it's Scandinavia, then they lose that edge. Then, of course, they also want to go home at normal hours and so on. So unless you can build that creative culture where you actually have sometimes take out the time to do something like this, and you have enough tasks for them, I would say that's maybe you have if you're big enough, you have the creative director who's setting the direction, and then you bring in people who can challenge him or her for that part. But the rest of it makes a lot of sense to bring in. So I would say, but it's basically just looking at the numbers. Are you utilizing the people enough? Maybe not in the first ideation phase, but the rest of them is just how much do you pay a freelancer extra? So for us, it's normally, if you use a freelancer more than 63%, that's like when the needle flips, say, okay, these are the people we should hire in, because then we get more from having them in-house in our team.
Now, you are the author of 2 books, one being Win House, How to Move Marketing In-House and Have the Best of Both Worlds. The other book being Moving In-House, Why It Might Be Good for Your Business to In-House Your Marketing Activities. I'm curious, so in these books, you're obviously sharing your expertise and insights, the years of helping organizations bring these functions in-house. When it comes to talent acquisition, which you just alluded to earlier, how would you address this issue? Obviously, we want to hire the best talent as our budgets would allow, but there's also a piece around culture and the overall direction of a brand. How would you recommend that organizations look at meshing the two in order to get the best outcomes when it comes to talent acquisition?
Yeah. So especially in the last one, the Win House, the last book, we focused on saying, so the first one, I was very pro in-housing, but still bringing in external at sometimes. But I also realized all the issues I had with the in-house teams I was building and running was getting that outside in perspective. So it's very, and building that creative culture, basically, because you're sitting in the middle of a big corporate company. Just at Maersk, everybody was wearing suits and ties every day, and you come in, and it's just, it's really difficult to have that. Creativity is not about playing loud music or eating pizza at your desk and playing what you call a table for spall, but sometimes you need to clear your brain and go into a room and put up things on the wall and somewhere, and that can be difficult to do. So for us, it's a lot about building a creative culture, and that actually help bring in new people because we can show that what we're doing is working and people are actually enjoying it. So we do a lot of of that social stuff, seeing what other people are doing, showing best of festivals, creative festivals. It's also making room for mistakes, saying, if you have an idea, bring it on, let's test it. Let's find a way to test it in a small way that doesn't really affect the brand. Or if it's wrong, it's fine. But that also takes time to build that creative culture where people are allowed to say what they are feeling and thinking and so on. And it's not just a machine where there's a project manager carrying one piece of work from one desk to the next one and so on, that you actually bring people together. The best ideas come from me saying something really stupid, a really bad idea, and then somebody next to me picking it up and saying, it's lame, but what about if we did this? And it just gets tiny better. And then I say, oh yeah, that's funny. What if we did this? And somebody else. So it's not a brainstorm. It's more like a collaborative effort where you are in one room for an hour, 2 hours. So not just sitting at your desk and taking ideas and cracking them out like that. It's more, my bad idea becomes slightly better when somebody else is improving on it. And that you can only do if you take your time to do it. So it is, of course, building a culture where it's okay to go in a war room or a meeting room or whatever you call it and work on something for more than 5 minutes, and don't be so micromanaging about the time, because I think everybody wants to do do their job the best way they can do it. They also want to, and we can see that when we're doing, back to where we started, when we're doing the creative stuff, it actually works better. Take your time to do less, but better, and play with it. Be playful. I have this small school that I teach every Wednesday for, I don't know, 30 nights every year. And I always say it's really difficult to get 100 bad ideas. So if you just keep going, you will get something out there. And if you have the time and the trust in the people you bring in, then you will come up with great ideas. But back to your question about the culture, how do you build great culture? Better books than mine on that, I think. Uh, it is about trusting people, allowing them to make mistakes, allowing them to come up with their own ideas, showcasing what they're doing. If they're doing great, bringing them out and say, hey, this guy, he actually did something really fun without a brief. Because sometimes it's also back to the ring size idea. It's also about seeing something and say, maybe there's something in here we can work on. That's not necessarily the brief we were asked to do, but this might actually help.
Certainly. With this idea of in-housing and creativity, I was wondering, could you paint us a picture of what an outcome that has been achieved as a result of you working with an organization to build up their in-house capabilities?
A recent example was we were doing the launch would be an example so we're working with Hyundai in Denmark and Norway and Sweden. And we had to do something. The budget wasn't that big, so it was mostly outdoor and also digital and so on. And basically we got back to data. We got a big report saying that at least in Scandinavia, Hyundai has been a bit of a dull, boring brand and people were actually saying this. So we took out some of the statements in the report. And so the whole process that we didn't have a lot of time, as it normally is. We are always a bit late. So I was part of the team, and then we had another copywriter coming in, and we were just sitting in a room with the in-house team trying to punch ideas. And we got this report as a starting point, and they were just saying, yeah, the Hyundai is like a plastic car, or it's made for old people with hats, and it's very boring and so on. And one of the, and we just started to say, okay, there's something in there. Let's just pick that up and say it's a plastic car. And then we could actually say, yeah, but the new Ionic 5 is actually made of plastic. It's made of reusable plastic in the roof. So that's funny to take that angle. And then we started doing that as one direction, so to speak. Say, okay, let's just take all the people that saying it's bad and turn them around and say, yeah, you're right. It's actually a roomy car. You could have your hat in there if you wanted to. So that was one way of doing it. And the idea is that we just did it really fast. So just drawing a really bad sketch of the car and putting in the headline on so I always say like black ink, white paper. That's it.
Mhm.
If the idea works on that, it will work when we do the photo shoot and the video and you do the whole industrial light and magic fly in on Colosseum or whatever they do. If it works on paper, it will work when you do it later on
Mhm.
something else. Another direction was saying, oh, do we have any words that come from electricity? Because it was a new electric car. And at that time, this is 2 or 3 years ago, people had a lot of range issues with electric cars, but they also said, oh, they look they look boring, all of them. They look the same, they're small and so on. And then we said, it's fun that it's actually called that. So we said, what about if we just say that, say what, but spelled it wrong? Because it was outdoor, it really worked well because it was just one of those where we said, oh, they spelled the word wrong. No, they didn't. It's actually, and that kind of ended up being, we had other ideas, but that ended up being the one. And actually the follow-up we just did this spring saying that's next, what's next, but spelled like that. I'm really bad at explaining it, but it is a great idea. And what is love and so on. So actually playing on that fun or play on words
Mm.
was something that just started as what inside matters or something like that. So I actually started playing on that. And that kind of gave us a direction pretty fast, saying we can, with a simple word change, do something that stands out that people will stop and look at because it looks weird. It's spelled wrong. And they say, oh no, it's not actually what, it's that, because it is talking about power and electric cars and so on.
Mm.
And the thing is, we did the drawings. I finished them up a bit, but still drawings. And then we tested it. So we just put it on a board, and some of them were online tests. And some of them we just walked out on the streets in Copenhagen and Stockholm and showing it to people, say, hey, do you get it? This is fun. So we showed these different directions. And within a week, we actually knew that this was going to be good. And this was the direction we want to go in. So it's both a testament to try something new. And if you put something on the wall and everybody comes in and say, oh, that's clever, or that's funny, and it probably is, right? And then you
Yeah.
can test it a bit more and actually do it instead of going out. And you don't have to do that big test thing sometimes. It's about trusting your guts, and take a hypothesis to is this working? And then expanding the test. If you show it to 20 people and they all like it, it's probably funny.
Sure. That's a brilliant example. Thank you for sharing that. With this idea of creativity and in-housing, are there perhaps a couple of areas that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Uh, that's a great question. Right now, so you say creativity in-house, but what I really think is interesting is, and creativity is not just coming up with ideas. It's actually much broader than that, I think. But
Mhm.
what I see at the moment is one of the interesting places things are going is it's within media buying, because it's really a black box. And I'm not putting any media agencies down. It's just really difficult for the customers to understand this and to be agile enough to see this is not working. I need to shift something. At least in the companies that we're working with, they get a media plan, they do something, they put it out there. Then a month later, they get a report back. And that's way too late. You don't really have the insights, and the creative team doesn't know if it's working or what part of it is working. What I see now is having more a media agency in-house that's actually helping with the creativity, creative part is not just the content, it's also the placement. Could we put this somewhere else? You've seen this in stores over the last 15 years, where you see companies like Mars putting their snacks next to the beers, or testing out a scenario where you say, okay, if we're buying beers, we're probably in a, maybe it's Mars, a bad example, but peanuts and so on, crisp or chips, depending on where in the world you're sitting. So if you're buying beer, you're probably in a relaxed partying situation, and you also need something to go with that. And that same approach of looking at media, saying, where are people right now? How should we approach this? Is it something different from the morning situation or afternoon situation, or is it the weather, or is it something happening right now that we can, what do you say, tap into? That would also be interesting. So right now, I think that a lot of media placement or buying is moving in, and it allows the creative team to be more creative because they get feedback on what they're doing. And it's also easier to do the test things. But it also allows the companies to save a lot of money because they can easier turn up and down budgets on what's working. I have an anecdote for everything apparently, but I hope that's okay. But when I was at George Jensen, we realized that a lot of people were buying necklaces and so on in the airports on Fridays. So it's again, back to the human thing. It wasn't a big inside thing. It was just like, look at the data. When are people buying what? And we could see, so this is a bad conscious thing. I've been away traveling with work all week, and I come back Friday and I want to buy something. If you were working at Lego, that would be your big day as well. I'm coming back to the family. This is something we're going to do for the weekend. So we started doing, first of all, grab and go things. People are just coming home and they buy something. And that's not a ring because they didn't know the ring size, of course. It was more like a necklace or earrings or something like that within different price areas. Of course, this is not, so that part is very physically, but the advertisement for it was basically people are sitting in the plane. If you were sitting in a plane flying towards Copenhagen, or that was where we had a big flagship store. That was, again, back, it was very simple setup. You could start doing advertising those places. And it's very cheap because it's a very niche area, saying you only target men traveling for business towards Copenhagen Friday afternoon. Then it's not that expensive. And then you just have your grab and go table where people are coming from the arrival and going towards customs and so on. It's just an example. It was just try to be creative with the media buying process, and not being in silos, but very much work together as one team and say, I have this idea. I just noticed that we are selling more of these products here. Could we do anything to do more of that? Or is it because we need to do more of the other stuff? So being an integrated part of the team, having media persons as well, and not just, and that's basically back to the steps I was mentioning in the beginning. So the first one is the production studio. Then you have the more creative content. And then you're getting to, I don't necessarily have a model for that, but then you're getting to the media buying, the insights, the total lead agency, creative agency on top. So I think bringing in, so the two things I've seen at the moment is bringing in creative directors and bringing in media people to build that entire setup.
Okay.
And of course
that certainly makes a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing that as well. To wrap up, Kasper, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I would say that it's take a lighter approach. Don't necessarily build an entire in-house agency. Try to bring in people from the outside. So first of all, it would be test and learn. Test, really try small and expand if it's working. It doesn't cost a lot. Allow people to fail. And then I would say, so that's the one thing. If you're really building an in-house agency, I would look at the workflows, the roles and responsibilities, because that's where in-house agencies are struggling. That's when they don't have the processes in order. If they don't really know when, who is doing what, and you keep going back and forth and changing things when you're in production and so on. Yeah. So if you have an agency, I would look at my workflows and my processes. If you're just testing it out, I would say test it out. Bring in people. You can call the most creative agencies sometimes and say, maybe not, and say, I just need your idea. I don't want your whole campaign stuff. I just want to do a brainstorm for an entire day. And even though that seems expensive, it's not as expensive as buying the entire house for a long period of time. You can get a lot of ideas and a lot of ways of working in that. I think
Join
that
that.
would sum it up, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. And thank you again for that. A lot of gold in here. Kasper, for listeners who are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head?
So we have a website for the book called Win. What do you call it? Yeah, I like the book.com.
Okay.
Brought it here. Or of course on our website, or they can connect with me at LinkedIn, of course, with my first and last name.
Okay.
Yeah, so the agency is called Site.agency, and they can read a bit more there. We also have an insights section where we share all the knowledge that we pick up. But just reach out on LinkedIn.
Okay. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Kasper, thank you so much for doing this. It's been brilliant.
It was really fun talking to you, Vinny. Mostly me talking. Sorry for talking too much. But I hope that some of the anecdotes and stories were relatable. It was really fun doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you.